My name is Sadie Vance, and the second week of November, I turned to 23 years old. I was living in the back seat of a 2004 beige Honda Civic in the long-term parking lot of the Madison, Wisconsin Greyhound bus station with a 6-month-old golden retriever puppy named Tucker, $411 in a savings account, and the strong, steady cold of a Wisconsin November coming up through the floor of the car like a second blanket I had not asked for. Tucker slept across my legs every night. He had grown so fast in the 4 months I had owned him that his floppy puppy paws now hung off the edge of the back seat onto the driver's side floor mat, and I could feel the slow, patient warmth of him along my shins, even through 2 pairs of sweatpants and the thrift store wool socks I had been wearing for 3 days. I was 23 years old that November. My mother had died when I was 19. She had been a hospice nurse in Milwaukee, a quiet, steady, kind woman who had spent 26 years sitting at other people's bedsides in their last hours, and she had been diagnosed with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis the same summer I had graduated from high school. The disease had moved faster than her doctors had expected. The aspiration pneumonia had taken her at the end of a long, warm August day when I was 19 years old, and I had been holding her right hand at the small hospice she had worked at for the last 12 years of her life. My father had left the two of us when I was 4 years old. I had no living grandparents. There were no aunts. There were no cousins. After the funeral, I had sold our small rented house's furniture and our old Buick Century, and I had taken what was left of my mother's small savings, which came to $4,700 after the medical bills were settled, and I had gone to work. For 4 years, I had worked the kinds of jobs you can get with a high school diploma and a willingness to be reliable. I had been a barista at a small, independent coffee shop in Milwaukee for 2.5 years. I had been a housekeeper at a Hampton Inn outside of Madison for a year and 4 months. I had been very good at both jobs. I had been quiet and on time and careful with money. I had been saving in a small, slow, careful way for a community college nursing certificate to honor my mother's life, and I'd been very nearly halfway there. Then, in the second week of October, the Hampton Inn outside of Madison had filed for bankruptcy. The bankruptcy had happened on a Tuesday. The hotel had closed its doors on a Friday. I had received my final paycheck and a typed letter thanking me for my service in this same manila envelope on the Friday afternoon. I had $411 in my checking account that morning. My monthly rent was $850. My lease was up on the 31st of October, and the landlord had already informed me he was raising it to $975 for the new tenants. The math did not work. I had known the math did not work for almost a week. I had spent the first 3 nights of November sleeping in the long-term parking lot of the Madison Greyhound station because nobody bothered you in long-term parking, and the parking lot bathrooms by the bus depot were unlocked 24 hours. I had Tucker because in late June, 3 months before the Hampton Inn had folded, I had answered a free puppy ad on Facebook Marketplace from a family outside of Watertown, whose golden retriever had had an accidental litter of 9. I had not been able to afford a dog. I had gone anyway, because there had been a photograph of the puppies on the ad, and because I had been more tired and more alone that summer than I had ever been in my life. I had come home with the smallest puppy in the litter, who had crawled into my lap and gone to sleep with his nose pressed into the crook of my elbow. And I had named him Tucker, after a kind older guest at the hotel who had once given me a $40 tip on a particularly bad morning. Tucker was now 68 pounds and growing. He drank an enormous amount of water, and he ate 3 meals a day of large breed puppy kibble out of a stainless steel bowl I had bought at a thrift store in Sun Prairie. He skidded on his floppy paws every time I opened the kibble bag, and he had a particular soft sigh he made when he flopped down beside the empty bowl after a meal, as if he had been working a long shift and could finally rest. On the cold, rainy night I am about to tell you about, I had been scrolling on my cracked phone in the back seat of the Honda Civic for almost 2 hours. I was looking at cheap rural property listings across northern Wisconsin. I was not looking with any plan. I was looking because the screen of the phone was the warmest thing in the car after Tucker. That is how I found the listing for the bait shop. It was on the official county website of Vilas County in the deep cedar and pine north woods of northern Wisconsin, 6 hours north of Madison. The listing was a single faded photograph and 4 short typed lines. Abandoned lakeside commercial property, former bait and tackle shop, Lake Whisperwood, Boulder Junction Township. Includes shop, attached boathouse and dock, county owned, must assume ownership, $10 administrative fee. The faded photograph showed a small dark red painted single-story wooden building perched on a low stone foundation right at the edge of a still gray-green lake, with a low boathouse attached to its lakeside and a short wooden dock extending out into the water. The hand-painted white sign mounted above the front door read, Lindqvist's Bait and Tackle, St. 1952. I sat in the back seat of the Civic for nearly an hour looking at that photograph, with Tucker breathing softly across my legs. The rain ticked on the roof. Tucker, who at 6 months old already knew when I was thinking hard about something, did not move. I clicked the Bid Now button at the bottom of the page. I paid the $10 fee with my last functioning debit card. I shut off the phone. I went to sleep without telling anyone, because there was no one for me to tell. 3 weeks later, on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, a thick manila envelope arrived at the general delivery window of the Madison, Maine post office, addressed to me in care of general delivery. Inside the envelope were a deed of transfer, a county title form, a small tarnished brass key on a thin leather cord, a hand-drawn pencil map of the lake property, and a folded handwritten letter from the Boulder Junction Township clerk, a woman named Mrs. Bellamy. The letter said the property was mine. The letter said the power and water at the shop had been kept on at a minimum service level. The letter said the dock was usable and that the lake had not yet frozen. The letter said, welcome. I packed everything I owned into the back of the Honda Civic that same afternoon. It fit easily. 1 cardboard box, a duffel bag, a folded sleeping bag, Tucker's large stainless steel food bowl, Tucker's matching water bowl, a 20-pound bag of large breed puppy kibble, a small glass jar of dried apple slices I cut up myself for his training treats, which he loved more than anything else in the world. We drove north on the Wednesday morning before Thanksgiving. The first hour out of Madison was rolling farm country in the cold gray light. By the second hour, we were into the pine country, and by the third hour, the lakes had begun to show themselves between the trees. Small, round, dark lakes, big, long lakes, lakes shaped like commas and like crescents, every one of them rimmed with the tall, straight black pines of the Wisconsin North Woods. We stopped halfway up at a small roadside diner outside of Wausow called the Loon's Nest. I had not eaten a real cooked breakfast in 3 weeks. I ordered 2 eggs scrambled, 2 sausage links, hash browns, dry whole wheat toast, and a black coffee. The waitress, a quiet, kind woman of about 60 named Mrs. Vance, no relation, who saw me before I sat down at the counter, slid the bowl of hash browns over to me and set a small saucer with both sausage links carefully aside on a folded paper napkin without asking. "For your boy," she said. "He's got a long drive yet." She wouldn't take a tip. I broke the sausage into pieces in the diner parking lot, and I gave them to Tucker, one slow piece at a time, while he sat on the asphalt beside my driver's side door, watching me with his warm chestnut brown eyes and a small ribbon of drool down the front of his white chest patch. We rolled into Boulder Junction Township just before 2 in the afternoon. The town itself was a quiet single intersection, a small white-painted town hall, a Boulder Junction general store with a wooden front porch, a tiny tavern called the Black Spruce, a small post office that doubled as the township library on Wednesday afternoons. The road to the lake was 2 miles north of town, along a narrow strip of gravel that ran between stands of red pine and white birch and small dark cedar swamps. The last quarter-mile of the road dropped slowly down toward the water through a low cathedral of pine, and at the end of it, exactly where the hand-drawn pencil map had said it would be, stood Lindqvist's Bait and Tackle. The shop was a small dark red single-story wooden building perched on a low stone foundation at the very edge of Lake Whisperwood. The white-painted hand-lettered sign above the front door read, "Lindqvist's Bait and Tackle, EST, 1952, in a careful old letterer's hand. Attached to the lake side of the building was a long, low boathouse with 2 great wide barn-style boat doors that faced directly out onto the dark gray-green water, fastened shut from outside by a thick rusted iron chain looped through their handles, and a heavy padlock the size of my fist. A short wooden dock extended out from the boathouse into the lake. Behind the shop was a small cleared yard with a stone fire ring and a folded green canvas chair that had been left out for an unknown number of winters and was now nearly black with mold. I parked the Honda Civic in the gravel turnaround beside the shop. I let Tucker out. He bounded out of the back seat the way puppies do, all 4 floppy paws skidding on the gravel. And he ran one big enthusiastic loop of the cleared yard before his nose hit the open lakeside door of the boathouse. And he stopped. He sat down. He did not bound off again. He sat exactly where he was, with his small puppy ears forward and his warm chestnut eyes locked on the great wide boat doors, and he refused to move. I called him. He did not come. I walked over to him and I bent down and I scratched the soft golden fur between his ears, and he leaned into my leg with his whole 68-pound puppy body, but his eyes never left the boathouse doors. The brass key from Mrs. Bellamy's manila envelope, which I now had hanging around my neck on its thin leather cord, did not fit the boathouse padlock. There were no other keys in the envelope. I unlocked the front door of the bait shop first, because the front door was where my brass key fit, and because if I was going to sleep on the floor of anywhere that night, it was going to be a building with a working wood stove. The small brass bell hanging on the inside of the door rang twice, And the sound of those two soft brass notes was the first sound that had been heard inside Lindqvist's bait and tackle in 26 long, quiet years. The interior was a perfectly preserved 1950s Northwoods bait shop, undisturbed. Along the right-hand wall were tall pegboards crowded edge to edge with antique fishing lures hanging on small brass cup hooks, wooden plugs and spinners and spoons in every color, each one with a small handwritten paper price tag, yellowed by time. Along the left-hand wall was a long wooden sales counter, polished smooth by 70 years of fishermen's elbows, with an old brass cash register at one end, a small round candy jar half full of fossilized red licorice whips, and a wooden rack of yellowed Wisconsin fishing license forms. Mounted to the back wall above the counter, lit by a single brass desk lamp on a long swing arm, was an enormous taxidermied muskellunge, a Wisconsin record muskie, by the small brass plaque under it, 58 inches long, caught by a man named Hans Lindqvist in the spring of 1968. The whole shop smelled of cedar and old varnish, and the faint sweet acetone smell of vintage rubber worm packaging. Tucker did not come inside. I went back out and I scooped him up under his belly. At 6 months old, he was still small enough that I could carry him with effort, and I brought him into the shop. He squirmed once and licked my chin, and then he wriggled out of my arms and ran straight back out the front door and around the side of the shop to the boathouse, where he sat down in front of the great barn-style doors again and looked at me, waiting. That first night I slept on my folded sleeping bag on the worn pine floor of the back room of the bait shop, which had a small black ironwood stove I lit with cedar shavings I found in a tin box beside it. For dinner, I heated up a can of chicken noodle soup on the small camp stove I had brought from the Civic, and I crumbled half a sleeve of saltines into it, and I ate it slowly out of a tin mug, sitting cross-legged on the sleeping bag with Tucker pressed warm against my left hip. Tucker had his dinner from his large stainless steel bowl by the back door, a full puppy serving of large breed kibble with a small dollop of canned chicken wet food mixed in. He ate noisily and fast, and then he came over and flopped down across my feet with his contented little post-meal sigh, and I broke a saltine in half, and I gave him both halves out of my open palm. He took them with the slightly clumsy gentleness of a 6-month-old golden retriever who is still learning how to be gentle. I gave him a dried apple slice from the glass jar afterward as his evening treat. He chewed it slowly on his back molars, watching me the whole time, his eyes half closed. That night, I dreamed of water. I dreamed I was standing on the wooden dock outside the boathouse in the middle of a perfect summer afternoon, and there was something pale gold moving slow and quiet beneath the dock between the pylons. I could not see what it was. I only knew that it was beautiful. I woke before dawn to the soft, persistent sound of Tucker scratching at the inside of the bait shop's lakeside door. He wanted out. He wanted to sit in front of the boathouse. I let him out. In the cold blue pre-dawn light, he ran straight to the boathouse doors and sat down again. I made coffee on the small camp stove with my enamel percolator, and I made 2 scrambled eggs in my small cast iron skillet, and a piece of buttered toast cooked over the open flame. And I ate breakfast standing in the open back doorway of the shop, watching Tucker sit guard in the cold blue light at the boathouse doors. I gave him the last bite of egg yolk off my plate when I was done. Then I walked back inside the shop, and I began the slow, careful work of finding the boathouse key. It took me 2 hours. I went through every drawer in the sales counter. I went through every coffee can on every shelf. I went through every pocket of an old fishing vest hanging on a brass hook behind the counter. I finally found the key in a small carved wooden box on the second shelf of the tall pegboard wall, where it had been sitting in plain sight in a tangle of small loose tackle for 26 years. The brass key tag tied to it read in faded blue ink simply, Boathouse, HL. I walked outside with Tucker bounding at my heel, his soft puppy tail beating against the back of my leg, and I knelt down at the great barn-style boathouse doors. The small brass key from the carved wooden box slid into the heavy iron padlock and turned with the slow, heavy click of a lock that had been waiting 26 long years to be opened. The chain came loose and fell heavily onto the dock planks. Tucker pressed his shoulder against the right-hand door the way a much older dog would, and the door slid back along its rusted iron track with a long, deep groan that carried out across the still gray lake. The smell came out first, cedar and old marine varnish and the faint metallic sweetness of an enclosed space that has been sealed for a long time. The morning light from the open lakeside doors fell into the boathouse and lit up, dead center on the boathouse's slip, what was waiting inside. It was a boat, a long, low sculpted wooden boat, 22 feet of polished mahogany hull, narrow at the bow, broad at the stern, with a small cockpit lined in deep red leather and a polished chrome windshield and a tall chrome stern flagpole suspended on heavy canvas slings just above the surface of the slip water. The wood had been kept oiled, and the canvas covers had been carefully fitted to the cockpit so that the leather had stayed dry. The bow plate above the stem read in small polished chrome script the words Chris Craft, Custom, Algonac, Michigan. A 1947 Chris Craft Custom, 22-foot runabout in its original factory finish, with under 1,900 hours of recorded operating time on the brass hour meter mounted in the dashboard. I sat down on the wooden planks of the boathouse with Tucker bounding up into my lap, and I cried into the soft golden fur between his ears for a long time. The lake water lapped quietly under the boards beneath me. The light moved slowly across the mahogany. I went back into the shop after a while, and I sat at the counter under the brass desk lamp, and I began to read through the old leather guest and trophy logbook I had found in the sales counter drawer the night before. The book ran from June of 1952, when Hans Lindqvist had opened the shop, through August of 1998, when the last entry was made. There were 3,041 entries. Every entry recorded the name of a fisherman, the lake they had fished, the species they had brought back, the weight, and the lure they had used. The handwriting was Hans Lindqvist's for 46 straight years. The very last entry was dated the 11th of August, 1998. Across the next blank page, in a different, shakier hand, someone had written in pencil, Hans passed peacefully today, in his cabin, 84. The boat in the boathouse was his wife, Astrid's brother's, lost in the war. Hans kept her for him. The boat is for whoever comes after Hans, whoever loves the lake the way he did. Marta L., neighbor. I sat at the counter for a long time after I read that. I looked under the floorboards of the back room of the shop that same afternoon, because something Tucker had been pawing at the night before, beside the wood stove, had finally registered with me, and when I pulled up the loose board with a screwdriver from the counter, I found in the dry crawl space below an old steel tackle box, locked. The key for it was taped to the underside of the cash register drawer. Inside the tackle box, neatly arranged in compartmentalized trays lined with soft red felt, was Hans Lindqvist's private collection of antique fishing lures. Not the shop's regular hanging stock, but his own life collection. The lures included hand-carved Hedden pumpkin seeds from the 1920s in original boxes, Flueger Conrad frogs from the 1910s, original creek chub pikeys in factory boxes, several rare Shakespeare Revolution topwater minnows, and a single hand-carved base plug signed on the belly in tiny gold ink, James Hedden, Dawajak, Maish, 1908. Underneath the lure trays was a small folded leather wallet holding $8,400 in soft-worn bills, the unbanked tips of 46 summers of guide work. In a small, carved wooden case in the back of the cash register drawer were 6 hand-carved cedar duck decoys, 3 mallards and 3 pintails, each one painted with the kind of careful sculptural realism that elevates a working decoy to an American folk art piece. Each one was signed on the underside of the keel in spidery brown ink, with the words A. Elmer Crowell, East Harwich, Mass. I knew that name only because my mother had once cared for a hospice patient who had collected American folk decoys. I spent that first full week alternating between the shop, the boathouse, and the small cleared yard. Each morning, I cooked breakfast on the small camp stove on the back room counter, usually 2 eggs over easy and a piece of buttered toast over the open flame, sometimes a small pot of oatmeal with brown sugar and a splash of milk from a quart bottle I had bought at the Boulder Junction General Store. Tucker had 3 meals a day from his large stainless steel bowl by the back door. A generous puppy scoop of large breed kibble at breakfast, with a small dollop of canned chicken wet food mixed in, a smaller midday scoop after his long morning patrol of the cleared yard, and another full evening scoop just before sundown. After every meal, he flopped down beside the empty bowl with his contented little post-meal sigh and slept for nearly an hour. I gave him a dried apple slice from the glass jar every evening as his end-of-day training treat. He chewed each apple slice slowly on his back molars, watching me the whole time, his warm chestnut eyes half closed in something close to gratitude. In the afternoons, I walked the perimeter of the lakeside property with Tucker bounding at my heel, and I began the slow, careful inventory of what I had inherited. I counted 48 lures hanging on the pegboard wall. I counted 9 wooden tackle boxes stacked behind the counter. I counted 2 old graphite spinning rods leaned against the back wall of the shop, with what looked like Garcia Mitchell 300 reels still mounted on them. I counted 3 pairs of antique waterproof waders hanging on brass hooks behind the door. I made careful lists of all of it in a small spiral notebook I had bought at the general store, the way my mother had once made careful lists of every patient's medication at the hospice in Milwaukee. The work of cataloging the shop was the closest thing I had done to nursing care work since the bankruptcy of the Hampton Inn in October. I had not realized, until I was standing in the back room of Lindqvist's bait and tackle counting brass cup hooks with Tucker asleep at my feet, how much I had missed having a thing in front of me that needed careful attention. The classic boat appraiser who drove up from Algonac, Michigan 3 weeks later was named Mr. Strickland. He spent 4 full hours in the boathouse with a small flashlight and a leather notebook. And when he came out, he sat down on the dock and told me very quietly that what was suspended in my boathouse slings was, in his 30-year career, The finest unrestored 1947 Chris Craft Custom 22 he had ever personally inspected, an unrestored hull with original mahogany finish, factory paint, and complete original Hercules KBL six-cylinder marine engine still in running condition. He told me that conservatively at the right Chris Craft Antique Boat Club auction, the boat would bring between $150,000 and $210,000. A specialist on early American sporting collectibles named Dr. Hollister drove up from Chicago 2 days after that. She spent 6 hours at the counter under the brass desk lamp, examining the tackle box and the wooden case. She told me in careful, quiet sentences that the antique lure collection in the steel tackle box was worth approximately $140,000 at the right specialty auction, with the signed 1908 head and plug alone valued at $22,000. The six hand-carved Crowell decoys, sold through the Wright auction house in New England, would bring approximately $320,000, with the three signed mallards alone valued at $80,000 each. The combined conservative value of everything Tucker had led me to came to just over $670,000. I did not sell the Chris Craft. I sold 3 of the rarest lures from the tackle box and 4 of the 6 Crowell decoys, slowly and carefully through Dr. Hollister's network over the course of the following 10 months. The 4 decoys went together to a serious folk art collector in Boston. For a combined $280,000, the lures brought $95,000. With Hans Lindqvist's tackle box cash, and after Dr. Hollister's commissions and the taxes, I had $348,000 deposited in a small community bank in Boulder Junction in my own name. I kept the boat. I kept the head and plug. I kept the 2 remaining Crowell decoys, the pintails, and I mounted them on small cedar shelves above the sales counter in the shop because they belonged to the shop and not to me. I had the Chris Craft's marine engine carefully serviced by a small classic boat mechanic in Eagle River who had known Hans Lindqvist as a boy. And the following May, on the first warm Sunday afternoon of the year, I took her out across Lake Whisperwood on her first run since 1972. Slow, careful, the way Astrid's brother would have driven her, with Tucker sitting alert in the small red leather cockpit beside me, his soft golden ears blown back in the warm wind, his 60-pound puppy body now grown into a long, full-coated yearling that filled the bench seat like he had been built for it. I reopened Lindqvist's Bait and Tackle to the public on Memorial Day weekend. I had repainted the dark red exterior in the same dark red Hans Lindqvist had used for 46 summers. I had carefully repainted the white hand-lettered sign above the front door. I had restocked the pegboard wall with a careful mix of modern lures and a small curated collection of vintage tackle from Hans's original shop stock that I had decided not to sell. I had restored the brass cash register. I kept the taxidermied muskie on the back wall. I added a small handwritten card under it that read, Hans Lindqvist, May 18th, 1968. A Wisconsin state record he never officially registered because he didn't believe in paperwork. I also did one thing I will tell you about now. With most of the rest of the money, I went back to school. I drove the 90 miles south to Boathouse 3 nights a week for 2 years, and I finished the nursing program at the small community college my mother had once helped me pick out of a brochure. I am a registered nurse now. I work two 12-hour weekend shifts at the small community hospital in Minocqua, taking care of the elderly retirees who come up north to live out their last years on these quiet lakes. And the other 5 days of the week, I sit behind the polished sales counter of Lindqvist's bait and tackle, taking care of the fishermen, the way Hans Lindqvist did for 46 summers before me. I joined the small Methodist congregation in Boulder Junction that first winter, mostly because the church potluck on the second Sunday of every month was a kindness I did not know how to refuse, and the kind women of the congregation kept setting plates of warm tuna casserole and homemade cornbread and jello salad in front of me until I finally understood that they had decided to take me on. I made friends slowly. The general store owner, Mr. Bellamy, began to set aside the last loaf of sourdough each Wednesday afternoon because he knew I would walk in for it. The waitress at the Black Spruce Tavern, a woman named Greta, began to put my standard Friday evening cheeseburger and fries order on the counter the minute she saw the Civic pull into the lot. Tucker grew. He chased squirrels through the cleared yard. He learned to ride in the small red leather cockpit of the Chris Craft. He learned the word breakfast. Tucker is 2 years old now. He is the most popular living being on Lake Whisperwood. The local children come down from the township campground to scratch his ears and feed him pieces of granola bar. He drinks an enormous amount of water from a heavy stoneware bowl I keep by the back door, and his stainless steel kibble bowl sits beside it on a folded blue towel. He still skids on his paws when I open the kibble bag in the morning. He still flops down beside the empty bowl with his slow, contented sigh when he is done. He has a particular soft moan he makes when I take the Chris Craft out across the lake on Sunday afternoons, halfway between contentment and disbelief, as if he still cannot quite believe that this is the life he is allowed to live. I think sometimes about my mother. I think about how she sat at the bedsides of hospice patients for 26 years in Milwaukee and how she would have loved this lake. I think about Hans Lindqvist, who was 84 years old and dying alone in a small cedar cabin in 1998, a half-mile up the lake from this shop, who had kept Astrid's brother's Chris Craft suspended in canvas slings for 51 years for a girl he was never going to meet. I think about Astrid's brother, whose name I never learned, who was killed somewhere in the Pacific in 1944 at the age of 19, and who had loved a mahogany boat enough to leave it behind. I think about all the quiet, stubborn people on the long shorelines of this country who keep beautiful things safe for the ones who come after. If you are watching this, and you are 23 years old, and you are sleeping in the back seat of a Honda Civic in a Greyhound bus station parking lot tonight because the math finally stopped working, I want you to remember two things. The first is that the world has been quietly arranging good things for you for a very long time, sometimes 70 or 80 years before you were born. Sometimes in a cedar boathouse on a quiet northern lake, and your only real job is to keep moving in some small, humble way until you walk down to the right dock at the right small lake on the right cold November afternoon, and the right key finally turns in the right padlock. The second thing is that small, loyal puppies who are not quite finished growing up, no more than you think they do. They sit in front of the right door. They will not move. They lead you every single time to the canvas slings that have been quietly waiting for someone like you to lift them. I am Sadie Vance, and this has been Truth of the Roads. Tucker and I will see you on the next quiet road.